not just warmed up from yesterday's action, but he is warm and ready because he's under the comfort of that security blanket.
We're almost at game time. We're almost off. We're awaiting the first moves. Magnus starts with white. Any predictions with the opening before it's too late? Oh, it looks like the RETI. He got there first.
Yeah, we didn't have a chance to put in our guesses, but I think Magnus, the lights are out, at least over his face, so he needs to work on that camera angle, but hopefully the lights are on upstairs in his head. Oh, and there we go. He takes that drink of water. And what do you make of the opening, Tanya, where Magnus, he hasn't decided to create tension in the center, at least not yet. Do you like this sort of cagey start from him?
Well, we see him do this quite often, but against Wesley, it's usually been the start with the king spawn opening or the queen spawn opening. At least that's what we saw traditionally in the Champions Chess Star. So a new approach, but with Wesley's speed that he's responded with, he doesn't look, or at least he's not acting to be too surprised with this. And now it's the big decision. How does Wesley keep the tension in the center here, Robin?
Well, he decides instead of to keep the tension, he is trying to avoid it for now. David, Magnus strikes with b4, so he is trying to chisel at Black's pawn chain, and it is a pawn sacrifice. What do you make of this mini gambit?
Yeah, I've got to say I like it, but I also hate it. Firstly, you're a pawn down, so not my cup of tea, not the kind of favorite approach by many top players these days. You don't want to be too kind of materialistic in general, but here Magnus, his idea was to open up as many lines as possible, and Robert, you mentioned it's kind of a flank gambit. It's basically a reversed version of the Benko gambit, as we call it, but Wesley has said no, he bypassed this pawn. If Wesley earlier had captured on the a3 square, then white rook would have opened up on the a file. There would have been open lines here for the white rook. White bishop would have come out, so interesting that Wesley could have been a pawn up. He is temporarily, but this pawn will soon fall. And I don't know, have you, either of you two got experience in the Benko gambit? I must say, it's not my area of expertise.
No.
I've actually played this position with the white pieces, where white pushes the b5 pawn from b5 to b6 and gives that pawn back. But again, to me, this feels like a cagey approach from Wesley, trying to keep things secure, like his blanket that he's got on right now. But then again, this is the kind of stuff that can backfire against Magnus. Robin, does this surprise you that Wesley decided not to capture that a3 pawn?
Well, this entire opening has surprised me, and even Magnus's last move, pushing his pawn to a4 rather than capturing on b3. Both sides are trying to lay claim to important space and squares. The b4 square for black is now firmly under control, and then for white, you have this light square diagonal. The bishop on g2 is unopposed on that diagonal, and so we could see that bishop shining its powers across the board. I don't know whose position I'd rather have. It's a new position to my eyes, but it feels like one where both players are on their own.
Yeah, it feels like both players have trump cards up their sleeve. You mentioned the b4 square. White's knight also has access to a beautiful outpost on b5 a bit later. First, Magnus wins the pawn back.
As white that I like in this, and that would
after king to f3, you have a semi-blockade on some important squares, and the knight's surviving. But Magnus needs to find this move, and I think it's almost impossible. Knight to a1. He plays knight to f3 instead. And now Robert's move, king d6, looks like it gives black a big advantage. Black moving forward in control. Question mark given to that move. We can't fault it. Very human knight f3, especially in rapid chess. Who's going to look at a move like knight a1? And Magnus gives his piece back. This is going to be one-way traffic now. Level material yet again, but at the right moment, he can take this pawn. Not yet, because there might be some knight forks and knight checks. So maybe Wesley takes some time out to guard against that. But yeah, it feels like Magnus in big trouble in game 1 today.
Well, Tanya, I was about to ask you that Magnus up a piece for 2 pawns, but those pawns were running up the board, restricting White's pieces. Do you think this is a good practical try for Magnus? Because at least what he could envision for a draw, blockade on the dark squares, trying to take away some of these remaining black pawns. Do you think the draw seems more within reach now?
I think knight a1, the move that you were discussing, and Robin, that you pointed out, is so difficult to play and to even find. It's not even on your radar. A retreating move all the way back to a1. You're not sure how you're coming out. He just wants to get out of this game. He wants to find the fastest way to neutralize. But this might not be neutralizing at all, because a bishop versus knight in these endgames is good news for black. You can try and push. You have to watch out for that knight on g7 getting trapped. Bishop to f7, it comes back. How are you retreating with the knight? If the minor pieces get traded off, this is winning for black. Are you going g4, king f5? Knight f5, I'm sorry?
Process of elimination, you have to play g4. This is the only route back for the white knight, but Wesley has cut off this square. f5 now taken away from the white knight, and a big threat. The knight's still trapped. Like you say, Tanya, if there's a trade, knight for bishop, black will win due to this distraction, the outside pass pawn. So Magnus now needs to keep his knight alive. Is it the move g5 just to stop the threat? But this is still incredibly ugly. You're playing without a piece. And black's pawn looks like it's racing down the board. He plays it, again, process of elimination, but is he going to save this game? Exclamation mark, only move there from Magnus. He's surviving by the skin of his teeth. Robert, do you see any resources? Can black continue pushing?
Well, what White now wants to do is play h4, h5, and g6. Just get rid of that h7 pawn. Because if that pawn is no longer on the board, then the white pieces will go march on over to the c pawn, either blockade it or sacrifice the knight for that last pawn. A lone king and bishop cannot deliver checkmate, for those of you who are newer in the audience. So that is what White is aiming for. Get all of black's pawns off the board, even if you have to sacrifice your knight in the process. A great move, g5, h4 comes next. The black king kind of has to stay put, because as it goes up to f4, knight can now slide back to e6 check, and the knight is safe.
Yep, Magnus should be saving this game now that the white knight escapes that dungeon on g7. Let's take a zoom out of this one. Very